Good evening, everyone. My name is Jerry Dietrich. Welcome to the DTSC's fourth quarterly public forum of 2021. I'm a public participation specialist here at DTSC in our Office of Environmental Equity. Presentation slides for this meeting are available online at www.dtsc.ca.gov/public forums. These quarterly public forums have been designed to provide our communities, stakeholders, and tribal governments updates on what the department is working on and to provide a space to share your voices and tell us your thoughts. If you missed it before, you can find the meeting materials for this meeting at www.dtsc.ca.gov/public forums. For media questions, please contact Barbara Zumwalt, Communications Officer from our Office of Communications. Her email is barbara.zumwalt@dtsc.ca.gov. We'll post the link and her email in the chat for you. Slide 6, please. The mission of DTSC is to protect California's people, communities, and environment from toxic substances, to enhance economic vitality by restoring contaminated land, and to compel manufacturers to make safer consumer products. Slide 7, please. Beyond the welcome and introductions, our meeting agenda includes opening remarks from our director, a presentation on the Discovery and Enforcement Program, which is one component of DTSC's Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities initiative, followed by a question and comment section. We'll then hear an update on the 2021 California wildfire response with a second question and comment session before we wrap up. Slide 8, please. At this time, I'd like to introduce our Director of DTSC, Dr. Meredith Williams, to provide opening remarks. Dr. Williams?
Thank you, Jerry, and welcome to all of our attendees. And we thank you for joining us at the end of, I'm sure, what is a long day, especially during this time of year when it's the holiday season and people are especially busy. And as we approach the end of the year, it's a good time to reflect on 2021. It has been we've faced continued challenges, both in terms of the pandemic and, as we'll hear, in terms of climate impacts such as wildfires. And yet somehow we all, despite all of the challenges, we managed to keep moving forward. And I'd like to highlight just a few of our accomplishments here at DTSC, many of which can be found on our public website on our dashboard. So even in the face of a challenging year, our core programs have worked to significantly improve the way we provide our services and have taken our operations to the next level. When you look at our KPI, key performance indicator dashboard, you can see that DTSC has made significant progress toward our strategic plan goals. Here are a few highlights. We set a goal for our enforcement program to complete 90% of the inspection reports associated with our enforcement team within 30 days of that inspection. The team achieved 87% completion of those inspection reports within that 30-day time frame in the middle of the pandemic, and we think that's a huge win. 6,632 acres were cleared for reuse through our site mitigation and remediation program. Those acres contribute to millions of dollars in economic activity, including home construction and new jobs. Also for the site cleanup program, we've focused on grants and loans. We provided $685,000 over a 2-year period. That surpassed our goal of $650,000 that we wanted to get out for use through our grants and loans programs. These grants fund the cleanup of properties and empower communities to reclaim blighted land for safe and productive uses. These are things to be celebrated. Internally, our human resources team has partnered with our programs to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into our hiring practices so that we can have a workforce that represents California, the full diversity of this state, especially as we hire additional staff to meet the ambitious goals set out in this year's budget. Even though we're reflecting back on 2021, we're already looking forward to 2022. Next year will bring significant changes. Through the reform of DTSC next year, a board of environmental safety will be in place, and that will provide an additional forum for you to engage on departmental issues. And we'll continue implementing our Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities initiative, as well as our other programs. As we do so, you can monitor our work through our public dashboard. You'll begin to see additional key performance indicators on that dashboard, which will help you track our progress toward the goals of our strategic plan and reform metrics. With that, I want to wish you all a happy and safe holiday season. I hope you take time to reflect and to be with your loved ones and to enjoy the spirit of the season. Thank you very much. Jerry?
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. We appreciate you being here. Slide 9, please. To provide an overview of the Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities initiative, we're joined tonight by Mr. Grant Cope, Site Mitigation and Restoration Program Deputy Director. Grant, it's all yours.
Great, thank you very much, Jerry. And thank you to everybody for being here tonight. My name is Grant Cope. I am the Deputy Director for the Cleanup Program at the Department of Toxic Substances Control. I'm really honored to be here tonight. I'm a public servant, and providing the public with information, answering questions, most importantly, listening to your input, it is an essential and vital part of that job. And so I similar to the director, I want to thank you for being here, taking time to be here, and thank you for providing your input and helping us do our job better. I want to provide a little bit of a framework for the Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities initiative, the site discovery and enforcement program specifically. The framework is really based on the DTSC mission that you heard about earlier, but also direction in the budget that was passed to provide DTSC with the resources to help communities by cleaning up contaminated sites. You've heard DTSC's mission. It's a good one. It's to protect California's communities from toxic substances by, among other things, restoring contaminated land. That means protecting people where they live in their neighborhoods, in their communities. And when the governor came out with the budget back in January, he really kind of framed the cleanup part around two different aspects. One is to accelerate the cleanup of contaminated properties in environmental justice communities, in vulnerable communities. And the next was a commitment to use the funds on a risk-based approach using health-based criteria. Now, the budget that was enacted is utterly consistent, obviously, with DTSC's mission. And I think that what you'll see tonight is the team has put together the foundation for a program that really is true to that framework. It emphasizes revitalizing, protecting communities that are environmental justice communities by putting areas that are contaminated through a site discovery and cleanup process, and allowing those properties to be used in a manner that's safe and that benefits the community. So this is kind of just a tremendously exciting time too. One of the best things that I think about being a public servant is being able to find new ways to help people where they live. DTSC hasn't had a site discovery program in years. We haven't been funded for it. So building this is not just meaningful in terms of achieving the mission, but for the more than 300 people in the cleanup program, for all the people in DTSC's programs that we work with, this is what we do. We've devoted our professional lives to helping people, and starting a site discovery and cleanup program is just it's just tremendously exciting. So I'm gonna stop talking and allow Rafet Abbasi, who is one of the masterminds behind developing this foundation for the cleanup program, to describe to you in greater detail what that means. Rafet?
Well, thank you, Grant. And I would like to welcome all of you. And I'm very, very grateful that you are able to find time to listen to our presentation. Our intent is to provide you with the overview of our program, Discovery and Enforcement Program, that Grant was talking about. Next slide, please. So as Grant mentioned, that Discovery Enforcement Program never existed in DTSC. This is the first time we have enough funding to really create the program from ground up, and that we are very, very excited to develop that program. We have been involved for about 6 to 7 months now, creating the foundation of the program. So we are very, very excited to present that to you, and we're very eager to get your input. As this slide indicates, we have about $148 million that are allocated for Discovery Enforcement Program. That will be used for creating an inventory of the sites, conduct discovery investigation, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more, and do enforcement on these properties to ensure that department investigate, and if necessary, perform cleanup based on the risk-based criteria the department has. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the Discovery Enforcement Program is to really address dry cleaning facilities that have a potential to release toxic chemical into the environment. That's the first objective. The second objective is to ensure that we focus on communities that have high cumulative environmental and socioeconomic burden. We're doing that by using OEHA's CalEnv Bioscreen scores. So I'm going to get into that a little bit. I'll provide you an overview of how the CalEnv Bioscreen scores are calculated and evaluated, and we're using that as one of the proxies for selecting sites. Next slide, please. So OEHA's CalEnv Bioscreen score has two components: pollution burden and pollution characteristics. Pollution burden composed of exposure and environmental effects associated with pollution sources in the area. Population characteristic is associated with sensitive population that has propensity to have asthma, cardiovascular diseases. And the other factor, the population characteristic, includes a socioeconomic factor, which includes poverty and unemployment rate. So it's basically a numerical number, and it goes from 0 to 100, and highest is 100 being the highest pollution burden and highest poverty and socioeconomic adverse effects. So next slide, please. So I'm going to show you how we are using these criteria. So one of the things that why we are focusing on dry cleaning, there are about 6 very, very important reasons why we are focusing on that. First of all, the magnitude of this problem. There are a lot of dry cleaners out there in the state of California, active and inactive. There are, according to our HWTS system, there are about 7,500 dry cleaners across the state. And a lot of them are located in your neighborhoods in urban areas. They use a solvent called perchloroethylene that is potential carcinogen, potentially cause cancer. And it's estimated, according to one study, that 75% of the dry cleaners cause contamination. And if released to the environment, which is PCE, can actually pose significant threat to public health and the environment. So those are the 4 reasons. Next slide, 17, please. So those were the characteristic of operational reason that we are actually focusing on dry cleaners. We are also focusing, as I mentioned earlier, pollution burden and diverse socioeconomic factors. We are focusing intentionally in communities that have higher environmental burden, including exposure to airborne and drinking water contamination, adverse socioeconomic factors like high poverty rates and unemployment rates. So those are the 6 very, very important criteria. We think that we can we can zero in on those and initiate investigation and clean up on these sites if possible. Go ahead. Next slide, please. I mentioned to you the magnitude of this problem is huge. It's about 7,500 sites. This is basically the distribution of these sites, east, west, and south. South being part of Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Riverside County. As you can see, about 7,495 sites, about 5,000 of them are located in Southern California. About 1,700 of them located in the western part of the state, which includes San Francisco and San Jose, and then about 800 located in the eastern portion of the state, which includes Central Valley and Sacramento area. Next slide, please. So obviously there are so many sites, so this program will handle these sites on an annual basis, and we obviously cannot work on these sites all at once. So we have to really prioritize, and we are using two important criteria, as I mentioned earlier. We are using Kaplan-Meier screen scores and proximity of sensitive receptor to these sites. So I'm going to get into a little bit of, provide you a little bit of description on this. In the south, we are using the highest percentile. There are too many sites, so you have to use highest percentile of CES scores, which is 95 to 100%. In the east, we are using 90% and higher, and in the west, we are using 80 and higher. We're also, once we apply that criteria, we apply another criteria that is proximal distance of 50 feet to the sensor receptor, which includes residential schools, daycares, senior centers, and the hospitals. And our goal is to come up with a manageable number of sites. At this time, we think about 113 sites we should have resources to manage those sites. So that's, after applying these criteria, we have about 113 sites annually that we're gonna address through investigation, okay? Discovery investigation. Go ahead, next slide, please. So applying the first criteria, if you apply a CES criteria of 75% or greater, you're able to filter a lot of these sites out. You know, we're not saying that we're not going to address the rest of them. We're saying for year one, we want to apply these criteria to come up with a manageable number of sites. Those sites, 7,495 sites, will continue to be in our inventory. So as you can see, there are about 1,300 sites in the south, 124 in the west, and 235 in the east after applying the CES criteria of greater than 75%. Next slide, please. The second criteria I talked to you about was the proximal distance criteria to sensitive receptors of 50 feet. We apply that. As you can see, we have a little bit of a manageable number. It's about 113 sites. Still 77% of them are located in Southern California, and 18 apiece in the east and the west. Next slide, please. This slide actually shows you where most of these sites are located. These are the cities where these are located. As you can see in the south, most of these sites are located in Los Angeles. In the west, most of them are located in Richmond and Oakland area. In the east, you're looking at Fresno and Stockton are the two top cities where these sites are located. Next slide, please. Okay, site selection process. I mentioned earlier, we are in the process of site selection. We're refining the process. We had a public roundtable last week. We actually got a lot of valuable feedback from the public. So we are evaluating that. Today we are here. We are soliciting your input, valuable input into our site selection process. So that's why we are here. This slide actually provides you with the annual cycle of how the discovery enforcement program will work. We're going to have 118 sites at the outset. We're going to conduct phase 1 assessment, which we call a discovery types investigation. Once the phase 1 discovery investigation is completed, the department evaluates risk from these sites. Grant mentioned, you know, we're going to use the risk-based criteria throughout the process. That's what we're going to use. If the site has unacceptable risk, we're going to use enforcement process, which is available to us. I think Grant also mentioned to you that enforcement process did not exist in DTSC. Now we are hopeful with your help and with your assistance, we'll have a good program and we can initiate enforcement action on these sites, hopefully. perform response action if necessary, and or conduct investigation and cleanup. Obviously, if there's an immediate response necessary, then we'll do that, and we'll continue to investigate the site, make sure the sources of the site, sources of contamination are cleaned up. And of course, throughout the whole process, we'll continue to engage with you and other communities throughout the state to solicit feedback on our process and have this concept of continuous improvement from public input. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the discovery enforcement process I put together. Once the site discovery investigation is completed, the department plans to issue an enforcement order to the property owners. If the property owners compliant, then department will ask the enforcement order to be signed by the property owners and will conduct the investigation. Keep in mind that once they agree to do the investigation, the property owner will do the oversight and the property owner will do the investigation. If they don't comply with the order, the department will issue a notice of non-compliance and conduct what we call a ability to pay analysis to determine the economic viability of the property owners. And if they are not viable, then the department will consider the use of D&E funding and will conduct investigation and clean up under DTSC program, Discovery Enforcement Program. So that's kind of an overview of this, overview of the Discovery Enforcement Program we envision. We're happy to have any questions and comments on this. So we're very excited about the process. Next slide, please. Okay, so the timeline associated with it, where we are right now and where we're going. We are going to complete the prioritization process, develop a list for 2021 and 2022 year, our current fiscal year, continue to do public engagement. We plan to finalize our contracts. All of this investigation will be done through our zone contractors. So those contractors will be finished and completed and signed, begin site investigation, start potential cleanup, and continue to engage with public through our mandatory notification process or other means that we will get into a little bit later. Continue the site discovery process from spring to June. Start enforcement process at the same time the sites that we have determined what kind of risks they pose, and then start planning for the following year, and the whole cycle will begin all over again. So we start planning for next year in April. And again, the public engagement is an essential component of this, as Grant mentioned, and Dr. Meredith mentioned. It's incredibly important that you provide us with your valuable input so we can incorporate that and make this program even better. Next slide, please. I think that's about the end of my presentation. I would like to hand it over to Jerry. Jerry, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Rafat.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
For information about the Discovery and Enforcement Program, you can email Rafat Abbasi at dtsc.ca.gov. We'll put that link in the chat. And also, if you have questions about the ongoing public participation process that's currently in development for the Discovery and Enforcement Program, you can contact Patricia Ochoa at patricia.ochoa@dtsc.ca.gov. And this is a lot of information, and I'm sure there's going to be much more information to come on this program. To be updated, you can sign up for the e-list, and to find the e-list, you can visit our DTSC e-list main page, which is at www.dtsc.ca.gov/DTSC-E-lists with an S at the end. From there, you're going to scroll down until you find the CVCI Discovery and Enforcement Program, and then click on the subscribe button. If you click on the program name, it just takes you around to the other website. You want to click on subscribe. And we'll put that clickable link in the chat for everyone to go directly there. Next slide, please. We'll take the first question in the Q&A box is from Christina Walsh. And the question is, who made the decision to allow the use of dynamite to demolish the SPTF at Santa Susana's Area 4? And I'm not sure who wants to address that question since it's not part of our presentation tonight.
Fine, I can handle that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Christina. So the decision was made based on the building's stability, that it was the appropriate way in which to bring the building down without increasing risks. And it was done in conjunction with local governments, county, air board, and DTSC. So that's the short and simple kind of direct response.
Great, thanks, Grant. Another question that we have in the Q&A from Reverend McShorty. Please provide information for the underserved community in South Los Angeles and surrounding cities. Is that for a specific program?
Maybe Rafik, maybe you can go into a little more detail on the communities in Los Angeles that have, in general, understanding that we're still building out the program, in general, a pretty big focus for us, kind of give a context. The map is kind of statewide, divided into 3 regions. Maybe you can go into more specific language on the communities.
So most of our, and if I'm not able to address that question, please let me know. So the sites that we are actually selecting, again, as I mentioned, 2 basic criteria that we have used. Most of these communities are located in Los Angeles. So underserved communities are basically, we are basically using the Calorie screen scores, and communities that are that have a higher poverty rate and higher unemployment rates based on information provided in the Calorie screen scores. Most of them, as I mentioned to you, are in southern Los Angeles city of LA. A lot of them are also located in city of Carson, and there are a few other cities that these communities are located in. Hopefully I've answered the question. If I'm not, then please let me know. I'll try to elaborate a little bit more. I'm sorry if I'm not able to provide you the answer.
Thank you, Rafat.
Yeah.
Another question from the Q&A is from Ms. Robina Zuwol. In one of the last meetings, approximately 113 sites were identified as dry cleaner cleanup. Mm-hmm. There was a promise to provide the names, addresses, and site description of all these sites to participants, but the promise was not fulfilled. Can DTSC please provide this list? Thank you.
The department still haven't really finalized the list yet, Rubina. We are in the process of finalizing the list. And I'm sure Grant at some point that list may be shared with probably shared with the public. And we haven't finalized yet, Rubina. As soon as it's finalized, I think we can make that available.
Great, thank you, Rafat. There is a couple of questions in the Q&A from Ms. Christina Walsh, but I see that she also has her hand up. So I'm going to go ahead and invite Ms. Walsh to open her audio and go ahead and ask her a question verbally if that's what you want to do.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Thank you. My question pertaining to Santa Susana Field Laboratory has to do with the fact that we in the surrounding communities have attended dozens, probably for me hundreds of meetings where it was made very clear that the dust on the tires of the trucks that would be leaving the site for cleanup was something that would be a health risk and that the public should be aware of. So trying to understand the use of dynamite and how much dust would have been generated that day. That was done on a Sunday. It was done without notifying the surrounding public that has been through so much toxic contamination as a result of this site. It just feels inadequate to just say that everybody followed the guidelines when there have been so many years of this discussion, and then during a pandemic when there have been no public meetings, this decision was made. That is the reason for my question, and so I hope for a more detailed answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the follow-up question. I'll give you a kind of, once again, just a summary, and we can have somebody follow up with you with additional details. So there are monitors on site that were air monitors for dust that were active and that did not identify any increased level of dust as a result of the activities at the site. There were precautions that were taken prior to taking down the building. The building did need to come down. They wetted the building, interior of the building, as a way of making certain to take preventative measures for any additional dust leaving the area. So more than happy to get you additional information, including the data from the monitors. So we'll have somebody reach out to you, Christina, and get you the information. Thanks.
Thank you, Grant. We also have another hand up from Chris Mower. If you'd like to go ahead and open your audio and ask your question, I see that you have one in the Q&A also.
Oh, hi. Yes, thank you. Just a quick question. I was just asking to see get access or to the slide presentations that the gentlemen are using for the public forums today. I noticed on the public forum webpage they're available in Spanish but not in English. So no big deal, but I just thought I'd bring that to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll get the English ones up as soon as possible. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Another question in the Q&A is from Jennifer Stackhouse. Since risk-based criteria will be used, can you please provide an update when the revised Hero Note 3 screening levels will be updated? The last update is from June 2020.
So I can actually address that. We don't know yet. We are still using the 2020 version right now. Right now, as soon as we have any information that the revision, we have a date that the revision will be available to us and the public, we will let you know, definitely. Thank you for your question.
Thank you so much, Rafat. One more question in the Q&A from Reverend McShorty. He also wants to know if there's money available for nonprofit community-based organizations for community outreach to local citizen engagement. I think he does mean the discovery and enforcement program.
Yeah, I'll take that really quickly. Thank you very much for the question, Reverend. It's a great question. We have 5 different programs, and they do different things, is basically under this initiative, is the best way to describe it. This is a site discovery and enforcement program. We have another program called the Brownfields Grant Program, and that can include doing outreach to communities about how to reuse brownfields in a way that benefits the communities. So there is funds that we will be making available through another program under the initiative, which is called the ECRG. It's the Echo Community Grant Program. And more than happy to get you information on that too. You can actually get a lot of information on DTSC's website about it. There's a couple of other programs that we are working to implement too. These are all new. So we're getting them off the ground. One in particular is called a Technical Assistance Grant Program. And that would go directly to people in the community to understand and to collaborate on issues around sites. We're tremendously excited by the opportunity to implement this program. We've got people working to get it off the ground. So there's more to come on that. But we can get you information on the Brownfields Grant Program if you'd like. And if you follow us online, there's ways that you can sign up for mailing lists. We'll be putting out more information on the other programs as they are developed.
Thank you so much, Grant. And thank you for your question. I don't see any questions in the Q&A or any hands raised. I want to check again with Brittany to see if there's any questions on the Spanish audio. And we have none, thank you. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and move forward with our presentation number 2. Next slide, please. And to provide us with an update of the 2021 California wildfire response, please welcome Mr. Adam Palmer, Senior Environmental Scientist with our Emergency Response Program. Adam?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jerry. Again, my name's Adam Palmer. I'm the supervisor of the Emergency Response Program here at DTSC. And tonight I'd like to give an overview of the DTSC response to the 2021 wildfires here in the state of California. Next slide, please. So starting in early August of 2021, we started experiencing a number of large wildfires here in California. And by the end of about October, we had already had 16 major wildfires in the North State. Over 3,000 million acres were burned total statewide. We lost over 3,600 residential, commercial, and public buildings, and we had close to 500,000 people evacuated from the various counties. The 16 wildfires affected 15 counties, primarily in the North State, all the way from Siskiyou County, actually down to Kern County in the South. DTSC responded to all those locations. Two of the largest wildfires, the Dixie Fire that was in Plumas, Lassen, and Tehama County, and the Caldor Fire in El Dorado County. What was unique about these two fires is not only was there significant damage, but both these fires started on the western slope of the Sierras and ended up on the east side of the Sierras. In fact, the Dixie Fire crossed 395 and was actually burning east of 395. According to CAL FIRE, that's never happened since in California recorded history that we've had two fires start on the western slope and end up on the eastern slope of the Sierras. And I think that's attributable, obviously, to global warming, the dry conditions California has experienced over the last couple of years, and just a number of factors. So next slide, please. So what is DTSC's emergency response involvement in a wildfire? So the state of California, specifically through the California Office of Emergency Services, has been very aggressive and very proactive when these fires occur about providing support to local governments to clean up the debris that's created after a wildfire. And the first part of the state overall debris removal program is what's called phase 1 operations. So when a fire occurs and there's maybe anywhere from 10 to 20 structures destroyed by the fire, then DTSC emergency response will actually get started on pre-planning activities. So I immediately get a hold of my contractors. I start determining their resources. If it's a large enough incident, we may have to bring contractor resources from outside of the state. During the Camp Fire back in 2018, we had to bring people from Oregon, Washington, and as far east as New York, just because we had so many crews in the field. I start organizing internally with my resources, finding out staff availability. We're a small unit here in emergency response, so I have to rely on also resources outside of ER. So I start contacting those people, find out their availabilities. And then most importantly, I start coordinating with the external agencies, specifically the local agencies that's requesting our assistance. Unfortunately, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've gotten to know a lot of these people because we've gone to some of these counties several times. So initially I start reaching out to them, find out what their needs are, start identifying staging areas. If I can, start getting damage assessment maps. A damage assessment map would include all the parcel data and all the destroyed structures on each of the properties. If it's a big enough fire that's going to go to a federal declaration, like the Caldor and the Dixie, then I'll request US EPA assistance. And I typically do that because this year we had 16 wildfires, and so our resources were stretched pretty thin. So I did initially have our crews start on the Caldor and the Dixie, and then once we got mission assignments for the other fires, then I transitioned out and left the remaining of the phase 1 operations to US EPA to finish. And then, of course, we coordinate closely with the Office of Emergency Services. Every emergency is a local emergency. So when they make the request for DTSC assistance, they make that request to the Office of Emergency Services, who then issues DTSC what's called a mission assignment. And that mission assignment directs DTSC to go out and assess and remove all household hazardous waste and asbestos from residential, public, and commercial buildings. Like I said earlier, there were two next slide. So what is household hazardous waste? Well, household hazardous waste are a lot of the things we have in our, under our sinks and our garages: paints, solvents, pesticides, fertilizers, under your sink, cleaning products, and then a lot of compressed gas cylinders. Most of us have the barbecue that has the 5-gallon propane tank. That's something, if it's still under pressure, even if it's not under pressure, we'll mitigate it in the fields and render it useless. In some of the rural areas, and especially on the commercial properties, we'll run into large oxygen and acetylene cylinders. Those have to be mitigated as well. Those are the kind of things that you don't want to leave in a debris pile that would potentially pose a threat to the resident who may come back and start sifting through the debris, as well as the Cal Recycle that comes in and does the phase 2 debris removal. The asbestos would be transite siding. We do see some transite sighting on some older construction, some transite pipe. You see a vapor barrier underneath floors on some of the older homes that survived, as well as window caulking. So it can kind of be found anywhere, especially on the older construction. Next slide, please. So what is our phase one assessment and removal protocols? So initially, before we even enter a debris pile, we take a look at the chimney, see if it's been compromised by the fire. If it's leaning in any manner, we want to make sure we point that out to our crews. Are there any septic tanks? A lot of the rural areas, every house has a septic tank, and we need to make sure those are clearly identified so we don't have any issues with potentially a contractor or a DTSC staff person falling in the septic. And then we also look above us. We look for hazard trees. That's been a big problem. We have a lot of trees that are compromised by the fire, and we need to make sure that none of these trees could potentially fall in the debris pile while our crews are working. We've had to shut down operations on several fires over the years. Especially if we're working in the winter, we get into some large wind events, and we've had to shut down operations during the day because we've had trees fall. So once we scan the debris pile, then we have a couple of our contractors go in with a radiological meter and determine if there's any rad sources. We also use a multi-gas detector looking for any off-gassing from a liquid waste that may not have been consumed by the fire. We do find radiological sources once in a while. In the past, we had a gentleman that collected the old airplane gauges that had the radium dials. And then, or we've found Fiesta ware. The glaze on Fiesta ware has a radioactive component. So once that's identified, we set that aside, we put it in a 5-gallon bucket and place it in a 55-gallon drum. And then we have a separate subcontractor that will come out and remove that. The next person in is the certified asbestos consultant. That person goes in, they identify any potential suspect asbestos, mark it with pink paint. After he or she are completed, then the asbestos removal contractor goes in and they identify all that asbestos containing material that's been marked with pink paint. After the asbestos has been addressed, then we send in the hazmat crews into the debris pile to remove all the household hazardous waste. Next slide, please. So prior to 2017, 2018, our typical protocol when going out to the fires is we would get an Excel spreadsheet from the local requesting agency listing the assessor parcel number, the address, and the number of structures on each parcel that was destroyed. And most of us, we don't know the area. We're going into an area that we're not familiar with. So we just got a spreadsheet and we had maps. And we would sit down, we would try to come up with our strategy each given day on where we wanted to send our crews along with the DTSC staff to focus their efforts on phase one operations. Also, the public had no knowledge of the status of the phase one operations because there was no electronic information that was shared. Next slide, please. So starting in 2017, and then we fully implemented it in 2018, our OEIM staff, our GIS folks here at DTSC developed a data collection app, and they put it on an iPad. And what it is, as you can see on the left, all the green parcels are parcels that were impacted by the fire, and then those little small red structures are destroyed structures. So what our crews do is each of our DTSC staff have an iPad, they have that form that's on the right, they go to that parcel and they input all the HHW and the asbestos that's been removed. And so it makes things much easier for me as the overall crew leader because each day I can look at the map, I can see what's been destroyed, I can tell a crew specifically where I want them to start, and then they can, and it just makes coordination and logistics much easier with this data collection. Next slide, please. And the best thing, one of the most advantageous parts about the field data collection is the instant communication. So if we have cell service where we're working, then all the data we collect for a particular parcel is immediately uploaded to our database, and then it's pushed out to the local agency that requested our assistance, in this case, Ventura, LA, and Butte counties. It's also shared with OES and Cal Recycle that are overseeing the phase 2 debris removal. And then it's also shared with FEMA. FEMA, for the federal declarations, reimburses the state for our contractors' costs. It also allows us to easily prepare assignments for each day for each of our crews. For the campfire, for instance, we had 35 crews. So having this data collection, just every day we could just go to each crew leader with DTSC, give them the iPad, tell them their operational area for the day, and then cut them loose and send them in the field to do the work. So it's really made, it's made things much easier for us, and it's increased our efficiency. I would say we've probably shaved off 25 to 30% of our response time on these fires now. Next slide, please. And I think the best part about this data collection is the transparency between the state, the federal government, the local requesting agency, and the public. So the community that's been impacted by the fire can go to this dashboard that's posted on DTSC's website, and we also share the link with the local agency as well. And they can see the progress that DTSC is making on the phase 1 operations. Over the years, I've had residents go into the dashboard and call me and say, hey, you missed, my property wasn't included in the initial damage assessment. I lost my house. Could you please add us to the dashboard? And we can easily do that. I've also had people monitor our progress and meet us when we were getting close to their property and say that they were kind of tracking us on our dashboard. So it's really created, it's created a nice level of transparency between the governments and the impacted community. So it's been a real benefit for everyone. Next slide, please. So these are some pictures I took. This is of the Caldor fire up in El Dorado County. So you can see we have a tree that, if there's a wind event, that's something we would have to be, pay close attention to. I mean, what's paramount, which is most important, is the health and safety of our DTSC staff as well as our contractors. So if that was a windy day, if it was a windy day, and it happened not to be when I was up there, that would probably be a debris pile that we would skip and then come back at a later time when the winds would die down. So these are the things you have to look for before you send crews into the debris pile. Next slide, please. These are our crews actively inside of a debris pile. This is the river fire up in Nevada and Placer County that occurred last summer. As you can see, there's a chimney off to the right. We would want to, keep an eye on the chimney, make sure it's not tilting one way or the other. As you can see, the crews are kind of working around the chimney. So like I said, it's not only important to have your eyes on the ground, but it's also have eyes up in the air too, just to kind of keep, just to give you situational awareness. Next slide, please. So like I said, we do commercial, public, and residential properties. This was a commercial property in Lassen County that was impacted by the Beckworth fire. This was a junkyard. This property alone took us a day with 2 crews. So we went through and removed any of the batteries that remained in these vehicles. If there was fuel, we dealt with that. And any of the household, any hazmat that we found on this property, we addressed. So this property alone had about 150 vehicles on it. Next parcel, or next slide, please. This is a solar battery. This is pretty common up in the rural areas. You'll see a lot of people that live off the grid, and they'll have these large solar batteries in steel casing. And so the crews have to manually peel those batteries out of there. And those batteries, even though they've been burned, the metal still exists. Lead, cadmium, zinc, nickel, any of that has to be removed and then properly disposed. That alone, that battery could take them probably a couple hours to mitigate. Next slide, please. This is just a picture looking down at that solar battery. So you can see it has been burned, but obviously it hasn't been totally consumed. So all that material would have to be removed. Next slide, please. And this is just a picture I took. These are batteries. These would be like car batteries. You can see they kind of look like a paper book after it's been burned. So this is the kind of thing that we would look for and we would remove. And so we would take all that battery material you see there, and we'd probably scrape the top couple inches underneath it. Because of the, the lead and the different metals inside the batteries, it could potentially seep into the soil. Next slide, please. This is the town of Greenville. Greenville was devastated by the Dixie Fire in August. These are some of the commercial properties that we had to assess. Again, we would want to look at the walls there, make sure that they're not leaning in too much. That way, something we would point out to our crews to make sure that they don't get within, too close of those walls because they are compromised. But you can see the downtown was hit pretty hard by the Dixie Fire. Next slide, please. This is another shot of downtown Greenville. DTSC would have been responsible. We assessed all these commercial properties in the downtown area. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of a building in Greenville. The high school fortunately survived, but some of the outbuildings did not. And as you can see off to the right, there's pink paint, and that would be asbestos containing material. Our crews are in there removing the asbestos and then any of the household hazardous waste. Next slide, please. These are some drums at a commercial property. We would assess all those drums, move any hazardous waste that was remaining in the drums. If they're marked with a white X, that means they've been empty and what was ever in it was consumed by the fire. Next slide.
Adam?
Yeah.
We do have a little bit of extra time, so if you want to take your time on these slides a little bit, that's okay.
Oh, okay, great, thanks. Yeah, and these are, this is another commercial property. You can see these are acetylene and oxygen tanks. The gentleman was probably a welder. So our crews would pull all those tanks, acetylene tanks out of there. Actually, some of these tanks also have asbestos around the valve. So those will be shipped off as asbestos containing material. But these are the kind of things that the debris crews do not want to see when they're running backhoes. So all this has to be safely pulled out and then mitigated and then disposed of offsite properly. Next slide, please. This is just a picture of a transite pipe. This is asbestos containing material. So as you can see, when asbestos, it's interesting, when it burns, it kind of flakes off and explodes a little bit. And there's asbestos laying around there, pieces of it. So our crews would grab this pipe and ship it off and take it off site for disposal. Next slide. So what's the status of the current phase 1 operations? We started our first phase 1 operation on the Tamarack fire in Alpine County on August 8th. To date, we've responded to 16 wildfires and we've removed HHW and asbestos from over 2,400 properties. We've completed our original emission assignments for all 16 fires, but that doesn't mean we're finished. We continue to support Cal Recycle during the phase 2 debris removal operations that are currently going on statewide. I've had crews out in the field the last 2 to 3 weeks as they find additional properties that were missed on the original damage assessment sweeps, as well as it's pretty common to find additional HHW once they start the debris removal and they start pulling back some of the heavier debris. So we continue to support Cal Recycle for that as well. So, and I just want to thank everybody for participating tonight and listening to DTSC and what our involvement is on the wildfires. I appreciate it. And thanks for taking the time this evening to participate. Back to you, Jerry.
Great. Thank you so much, Adam. That's certainly a lot of information. We appreciate the time that you took today, and we also appreciate your entire emergency response team. As we move into the question and comments for the wildfire response, we'll use the same system that we did before. We'll use raise hands to ask your question out loud. And if you type your question in the Q&A box, I'll read it out loud. If any of you have joined us late, this slide shows you how you can access the raise hand feature and the Q&A box. If you're dialing in, you can press *9 to raise your hand. And we'll start with asking if there's any questions on the Spanish audio line. And there's none. Okay, so we'll move over to the Q&A, and there is a question from Stephen Slater asking, how are those appliances depolluted before being taken to a recycler?
So we don't typically take white goods. But if we do encounter, if we do encounter partially burned televisions, we take that off as e-waste. Solar panels we will take. Oftentimes, a lot of these homes, like I said, are off the grid, and they will have solar panels. And if they're damaged by fire, we'll take those off as universal waste. As far as the appliances go, we typically do not take refrigerators, washers and dryers, and dishwashers and ovens. Cal Recycle deals with the white goods, but we will take the e-waste and the universal waste.
Great, thank you. Another question about recycling is from Octavio Cesar Martinez. Is it the goal of DTSC to negatively impact metal recycling in the state? How can we be sure workers, recycling employees, and our communities are not impacted?
Jerry, I'll take that question.
Okay.
Thank you, Octavio, for that question. Absolutely, we do care about recycling program. We promote recycling in California. We also want to make sure that recycling in California is done in a safe and protected manner and respectful of our communities, surrounding communities to these facilities. Again, we definitely encourage recycling, and we promote that. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have a hand raised from Ms. Christina Walsh. I'll ask you to go ahead and raise your, open your audio and ask your question.
Thank you. I was wondering about, first of all, I appreciated the slides and the presentation about wildfires in our area. We had the Woolsey fire where, unfortunately, when I look at all these details, you know, nobody was given access when the fire actually started at the Boeing property, and that was not known for quite a long time. So what recommendations can you provide so that we can get a more responsive process when the site owner is so large, such as is the case with Santa Susana? Thank you.
Adam, I can jump in there. Thanks very much for the question, Christina. Yeah, so in terms of being more responsive, so they, as with any fire situation, things move rather quickly. And for example, when Santa Susana got hit by the Woolsey fire, it burned through the area rapidly and then obviously went into adjoining communities. And it's essential for DTSC and other state agencies to work with local governments who are doing response activities. Part and parcel of that is the owners, wherever the property is located, whether it be Santa Susana or elsewhere, it is absolutely incumbent on those owners to both communicate the threat and then work with local authorities to be responsive. That's there's quite literally their responsibility under law. It's also the bare minimum that we would expect of anybody. Adam, I don't know if you want to say anything else.
Let me get off mute. I was a little bit involved in the Woolsey fire in that we did come in and do the phase 1 operations after the fire was over. We did not go on the Santa Susana property, but we did go around to the residential properties that were impacted by the Woolsey Hill fire. It was actually a combination of 2 fires that occurred down there. As far as getting access to the property, I mean, obviously the area was under mandatory evacuation. The incident commander, I don't believe was letting people in there at the time. But to the extent, I mean, we did conduct phase 1 operations around that area on the residential and the commercial and the public properties, but we did not go on to Santa Susana's property.
Thank you. We're going to go to a phone participant, the phone number ending in 011. If you can press *6 to unmute your line and go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, I'd like to ask the question, what do you do with all of the metal that comes out of the different fires as those go to metal recycling companies, and how do they handle it once it's there?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. DTSC, our focus through phase 1 operations is strictly on the household hazardous waste and asbestos. The phase 2 operations that are overseen by the Cal Recycle will pull out the metal, they will pull out concrete, and then they pull out the ash and the debris. As far as I know, they do try to make every effort to try to recycle the material or recycle the metal as well as the concrete. But I can't answer specifically where that material finally ends up or who the recyclers are. So I apologize, I can't answer that question. But I mean, if you wanted to reach out to me at a later date, I could put you in touch with representatives from Cal Recycle that are actively overseeing the phase 2 debris removal.
Okay, thank you. So in the Q&A, we also have a question from Maricela Mares Alatorre. What kind of facilities take the asbestos and other waste from the fires? Do they have to be disposed of in hazardous waste facilities? And are they environmental justice communities?
Typically most of the asbestos can go to a class 2 landfill. And there are some class 2 landfills here in California. I know Forward Inc. is where we send some of our asbestos, and that's located in San Joaquin County. Most of I would say the bulk of the household hazardous waste goes to class 1 landfills outside of the state of California. One of our main contractors is US Ecology, and they own a class 1 landfill in Beatty, Nevada, and they send a lot of their waste there. We do send some waste to Utah, and for the cylinders, we do end up sending some of the cylinders down to Texas. So to answer your question about EJ communities, I can't speak to that with respect to Nevada, Utah, and Texas, but I would say we don't send any of our household hazardous waste to any of the landfills here in California. I don't believe our contractors use Kettleman Hills, the Clean Harbors facility in Buttonwillow at all.
Thank you. There is a follow-up question from Octavio in the Q&A. It says, thank you for a response to my first question, but hundreds, if not thousands of Latinos will be adversely affected by your policies against metal recycling. What measure is DTSC ready to implement to mitigate the far-reaching efforts of these policy changes? So I don't think that that's for Adam.
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, this is Rizgar Ghazi again. As I stated earlier, appreciate your question. And again, we are, the department promotes recycling and appreciates the recycling programs that we have in place. What our program is looking at to ensure these programs that are in place are protective of the communities surrounding these facilities. And our focus today is about metal shredder facilities. These are the larger facilities, are not the recyclers. We have not changed policies about these recyclers. However, again, we expect these facilities to operate in a safe and protective manner, protective of the communities surrounding these facilities. I want to make sure that these environmental justice communities not impacted by their operations. And that's the goal, is to promote recycling. However, it needs to be done in a safe and protective manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Rizgar. I do see that Ms. Christina Walsh has a question in the Q&A, but you also have your hand up with a question about the wildfires. So I'll ask you to go ahead and unmute your line and just go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. The point I was trying to make about, well, as we're learning that the access really wasn't provided on such a large site that is so highly contaminated and with radionuclides in addition to metals and other things that burned. A large percentage of the site did burn during the Woolsey fire, and it was also the starting source of the fire. And yet it took over a year before we got a report that said that that was indeed the case, while we had videos and were showing that from the very start. So my question is, how can DTSC be more responsive to the local public when they alert you of impacts that we see, and that we feel certainly when we see this presentation of the details when it comes to other kinds of waste that is resulted from a fire, a site like that of a nuclear meltdown should at the very least be considered and taken equally seriously. And that's what I am trying to get at here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that too, Adam. I totally agree that these things need to be taken seriously. DTSC is completely open to receiving whatever information people have. When we conduct our phase of a post-fire occurrence, sounds really technical. It's a way of saying the very first thing that people do is they've got to go in there and fight the fire. So we get out of the way. We do not expect to have access to an area where it would threaten not just the firefighters, but potentially our staff as well. DTSC used this protocol on the Woolsey fire as well. We worked with first responders and respected their need to make certain to try and limit the fire as quickly as possible, given that it was around populated areas. And then we went in and we did our work, which is monitoring, sampling, analyzing, scanning, all of that was included in the report. And once again, in terms of any information that people have, and I'll defer to Adam on this, I'm sure that, to the extent that more information can be provided to us, the better. I think Adam referred to a couple ways in which the GIS system has, provided DTSC in the field with additional capacity and just transparency and working with communities.
Thanks, Grant. So we do have a follow-up question from Stephen Slater in the Q&A asking if we realize those white goods go directly to scrap recyclers who use metal shredders for the metallic materials, but in the condition received, those white goods are not able to be depolluted.
Again, I mean, I can only speak to what DTSC is focused on during our phase 1 operations, and white goods are not, part of our scope of work. Again, that's conducted by Cal Recycle. I'm not 100% sure where those white goods end up. I'm not going to say they go to a metal shredder. I'm not going to say they go to a landfill. What I can say is, I do have contact information for Cal Recycle. I can put you in touch with people that are overseeing the phase 2 debris removal, and they can answer your question about the disposition of the white goods that are removed from the debris piles post wildfire.
Thanks, Adam. And there aren't any other hands raised, and there aren't any other questions about wildfires in the Q&A box. I'm going to go ahead and go back to Brittany to ask if there's any questions about the wildfire update in the Spanish audio. None. Okay, thank you. But then we do have some time left. Thank you, Adam, so much. We do have some time for these other questions in the Q&A that are more about metal recycling. So I invite panel members to open your video and I can just read these questions. One of them comes from Brian Lopez. He says that his question is, how do you reconcile your new program of cleaning up vulnerable communities if your policies on metal recycling make it much more difficult to maintain our communities?
Thank you, Jerry. This is Rizgar Ghazi again. I believe I answered this question already. As I stated earlier, we do, DTSC promotes, along with the other BDOs of the Cal EPA, including Cal Recycle, we promote recycling. And we support that program that is being carried out in California. It's a valuable service that we provide to ensure that we're not mining additional metals and things like that. So this recycling is important to California, and we promote it. The focus DTSC has is to make sure these recyclers conduct their recycling in a safe and protected manner, and continue to protect the communities around them. The initiatives that the department is taking is the work that we're doing with metal shredders. These are the facilities that get scrap metal from these recyclers, and we're working with that industry to make sure their operations are done in a safe and a protected manner, and without releases to the environment and to the adjacent communities. Most of these metal shredder facilities are located in environmental justice communities, and they have been impacted by their operations in the past. And that's something that's where DTSC is focusing on now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rizgar. We do have a hand raised. Dawn Monroe, if you can go ahead and unmute your audio and ask your question.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, our family has been in recycling for 3 generations, now going on 4. We have extended family who have also moved and into other cities, states, and they're actively involved in the industry of recycling. And I think that when someone says that, hey, we're just making policy changes to metal recycling, the big guys, the metal shredding, that as if it's not going to have any kind of impact on the smaller recyclers like my family. I mean, my family is Black, Indian, and Hispanic, and we went through the trials and tribulations of starting this business years ago, and we continue to have to keep up with all regulations and environmental changes that regulations that are on our industry. We keep up with it, but guess what? That takes away from being able to open up additional facilities, because the cost of entry into the business is so high. So we become disenfranchised basically, and the very large corporations do very well in the environment of regulations. And I think that's something that no one has really taken into account. And the people who haul for a living, like my mother, who went through the back alleys of streets of Los Angeles picking up trash and picking up all the debris that was up and down the streets. It's sick to me that someone would sit there and act like this stuff doesn't go into these shredders at some point in the chain, or at least in the process of being recycled. These metal shredders are called mega shredders, and they consume an enormous amount of product or enormous amount of recyclables, from the smallest guy all the way up to the large recycling centers. So I think it's something that has been overlooked. I think it's something that the folks there at DTSC has really not done a complete study of the impact and those that they're disenfranchising. I think it's gone ignored too long, and I think you're gonna start seeing a lot more people in our community rise up against these types of tyrannical type of policies. And because we're being ignored. You guys are not having us at this table. And I've been to other meetings, and the comments, it's as if they become noted, but they don't become heard. And we need to be heard. And if we're not going to get heard, it's going to get louder. And that's just where I come from. And I'm hearing it more and more from the street level to the small businesses, because, hey, we have to knock off, an additional percentage because of policy changes at the shredder. So, and there's some people who don't need a shredder. There's some people that are big enough that they can bypass the shredder and go to markets overseas. We're able to do that sometimes, but look at the port situation right now. We have 110, 115 vessels sitting on the port there where people can't ship direct to other markets. I think that, it's fair to say that we need best available technology here. We need to protect our communities, but at the same time, we need to protect sensitive industry like recycling, because we do have other agencies that are so hard on the industry, and they want us to create markets here domestically, but they put those markets out of business. So we have these conflicted goals, and I think we need to sit down and really have a real discussion among industry leaders and stakeholders as to how the impact is really going to be. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. I definitely appreciate your comments and your concerns. I do want to invite you to a discussion, a much more detailed discussion with you and your group. Want to let you know that we have been looking at this issue for quite a while. We have been sitting down with the industry groups, with the community, citizens that are surrounding these facilities. We have gotten a lot of feedback. We have workshops with the industry groups and the communities, and there's a lot of feedback, and our decision was not done in a vacuum. I want to assure you, again, we want these facilities. They provide a valuable service to California. We produce a lot of scrap metal in California. We want to make sure that scrap metal is continued to be recycled and managed properly. Again, we have been in discussion for quite a while, and we want to make sure that we continue these facilities to continue to operate. Again, however, we want to make sure they operate in a safe and protective manner. We have these shredders, large behemoth shredders, that have been impacting our surrounding communities. We want to make sure that stops, and want to make sure that these facilities continue to operate, however, in a safe way. That our intent is not to shut down any of these facilities. Again, they provide a valuable service, and we want to work with them. We want to make sure they do it in the right way, so that way they could provide that valuable service to Californians and to protecting the community surrounding these facilities. Thank you. I do invite you to a meeting to meet with me and our group, and definitely would love to hear from some of your thoughts and additional thoughts that you had on this topic. I'm more than happy to do that, and I'll provide my name and email address in the chat box. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Carr. At this time, we do have one hand raised, and I invite Reverend Max Shorty to go ahead and open your audio and ask your question, please.
Hi, this is Reverend Max Shorty from South Los Angeles. The state has lost over 285 metal recycling facilities, and it has infected my community to the point where, folks are doing things that they shouldn't be. They used to use that money to help pay bills. Now folks are doing, things that they shouldn't have to do. And what I don't understand is why at DTSC board, there's not community members that sit on that board along with elected members of the state of California. We have city, we have county officials, but we have no actual community members sitting on the DTSC board as alongside elected officials, so that it's a balanced work together. As well as elected officials, there should be community members, there should be metal recycling industry folks that represent that industry, because we're attacking something that the state created years ago and had people believe in. I fill my blue trash can all the time. I don't receive no type of discount when a trash recycler pick up that. I don't know where that recycling material is going. I don't know who's getting paid for it, but I know it's not me, the underserved person in the communities. It's not none of my neighbors who live in paycheck to paycheck. So this this metal recycling and big shredder thing that that the DTSC is trying to go after is really going to hurt a lot of underserved communities and poor people. We already live in paycheck to paycheck. We're not at the state level collecting over $100-some thousand a year. And that board needs to recognize that community members have more so of a voice than they do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend. We appreciate your thoughts. Rizgar or Dr. Meredith, if you'd like to.
Yeah, let's speak to that. Thank you, Reverend, for your comments and your input. And I'm paying close attention to all the comments we're getting today from the metal recyclers. I do want to clarify one comment you made. You referred to the board for the department, and the new board, the Board of Environmental Safety, is in the process of getting seated, and that will start next year. There will be 5 members on that board. But I will say that legislation calls for an environmental justice advisory council. And so there will be an opportunity for community members to have a direct line of communication to that new Board of Environmental Safety on issues that are really important at the community level. So hopefully that provides another line of communication as we move forward. As to the concerns about the impact of our actions, again, there's a lot to balance here. I appreciate the concerns about the impact. It is not our intent to shut down businesses. As Rizgar has stated, recycling is critical as we move forward. Economically, in terms of just changing the way we think about things in society, we need recycling. It's important. It's critical. The amount of steel that's used, the percentage of steel that's used throughout the world, that directly ties back to the metal recycling industry and metal shredders, is enormous. I think as we looked at this, our decision to look at the regulatory framework for metal shredders, we became increasingly aware of just how vital the role was for that whole sector. And it is vital. We are, not everybody owns a car, but most of us are still driving cars. They reach the end of their life. You've talked about appliances. And we have some responsibility within California to take care of our own waste and to make sure that it's used properly. As Rizgar said, we invite additional conversation about how our actions to try to put in adequate protections on metal shredders so that there are releases right now of hazardous materials from metal shredders. That is the primary driver behind our action. We've looked at these metal shredders. Hazardous materials are escaping from those facilities. We need to get that under control. And that's the real objective of what we're trying to do. If there are upstream effects of that action, we need to understand those. We need to have those conversations. But ultimately, there are communities that are located near these metal shredders that, they deserve protection. They need to be, it's our job to look out for them and to get these releases under control and to find a way to help this industry operate safely and operate, in a manner where we're not running the release of the risk of having materials get off of the sites. And the shredders have been engaged with us. They've been talking to us. They understand what our objective is. They want to operate safely. So I think there's a shared objective here. And so we will need to continue to look at this issue. And I will say this is a case where there's an overlap, right? You are correct. DTSC is responsible for the hazardous and toxic materials, but let's all acknowledge how tough it's been for small local recyclers, because the bottle bill has, it's been hit very hard. You're right, many facilities have closed. And so it's been a very impactful several years. And I can understand the concerns that this would have further impacts on your operations. And I think we should continue to have the conversation. And if we need to bring our partners from Cal Recycle into that conversation, we can ask them if they'd be willing to take part in that conversation. But again, we really want to focus on the problem that we have identified in our metal shredder report that's available online, that really clearly explains what we're thinking, what the problem is that we're trying to get a handle on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. So we are at the end of the Q&A. There's no more hand raised, no more questions. But I do want to go back to another person's comment about the meeting materials. They're updated on the public forum webpage. So I'll go ahead and move to the next slide 51, please, and we'll talk about that more. So the quarterly public forum planning team, which I'm part of, we welcome your comments or your questions and suggestions on how we can continuously improve this space for everyone. We invite you to complete the post-meeting survey and to visit our webpage to view current and past forum information. The web address is www.dtsc.ca.gov/public forums. To be notified of our next quarterly public forum, you can subscribe to our e-list, which is located at www.dtsc.ca.gov/DTSC-E-lists with an S, and scroll down to DTSC public meetings and click on subscribe. You can also email us directly at dtscpublicmeeting@dtsc.ca.gov. We'll post all of this information in the chat for you so that you can copy it if you like. We also want to let you know that the recording for this meeting will be available on the public forum webpage as soon as it's converted. So we'll send out an e-blast to let people know when that meeting is available. Thank you for that question, Ravina. Next slide, please, slide 52. And that wraps up our meeting for tonight. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be with us. With everything going on in the world, we understand that you have a lot pulling you in a lot of different directions, and we're probably all inundated with these public meetings, virtual meetings, excuse me. And we appreciate your presence and the passion that you bring to this forum. I also want to thank all the presenters tonight and all the information that was shared and all the panelists. Thank you so much. So I'll go ahead and say goodnight to everyone. Stay safe and be well, but we are going to leave the meeting open to allow people to have the opportunity to copy all of the text in the chat if that's what you choose. I'll go ahead and ask or tell Brittany, thank you so much for being our translator tonight. We appreciate you. And for anyone who has questions about how to save the chat, you can raise your hand. I'll open your audio and we can walk through it. All right, I think that's everyone. I'm going to go ahead and say goodnight again. Thank you so much. And until we see you next time, good night.